You already said so. I'm Astrid Weij. I'm a board member of Europa Nostra and would like to reflect on what have we done this morning so far. So just see what comes out of us. Yeah. So because we only have 20 minutes time, so speed up a bit.
Okay, let's speed up, and what I had in mind was to have a few rounds of questions. I have some questions, and
No.
Sorry.
Most of them know me because last year I have been in Madrid, everybody with all of, I have been very glad of having you in Madrid, and well, many ideas have been exposed this morning, and very interesting experience. So let us go to speak everybody. I prepare a little leaflet that is outside. If someone is interested in Spanish, French and English, I write better than I spoke English. So let us go and discuss everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. We have been talking about participation, whether who has the right to participate, and whether, well, how to participate. Everyone. In practice, participation is always selective. It's not, or it's in very rare cases, in small communities, possible to reach out for everyone. So we need to make choices, we need to prioritize. And my first question round for the panel would be about this: how to prioritize, how to reach how to reach the margins, those who are not routinely part of the participation processes, or who perhaps want to abstain for such processes. What is your opinion about how to, whether the goal of participation should be to cover as much ground as possible and try to reach every part of the community, and how should that be done? So which end would we like to, would you like to start, please?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. I would, in fact, start a bit differently, saying everyone has the right to participate. And that would be my first approach, because I have a human rights-based approach, and human rights are for everyone. And I admit at the same time that I myself in my presentation said that there are different levels of relationship with cultural heritage, and that may mean that some may have kind of a priority over the cultural heritage than others. But that doesn't mean that the others should be excluded from the participation process. And in fact, before saying we should select and who should we select, and that is why our observatory is called an observatory, I think the first step is to observe and to know what is happening in the first place. That's why I think it's important to have a case-by-case approach, because every cultural heritage is different from another. So who has a specific relationship with the cultural heritage? For whom is it important? Would be for me the first question, before saying then maybe we have to select people for the participation.
I would say when I started my project, I knew nothing about urban planning. Learning a lot and falling in love with this and having this passion, I think this is most important thing for any activist to have, because if you are not on fire, you cannot ignite anyone around you. And then you use every method that is possible. You talk to people, you explain, you use social media. There is a lot of things on social media recently that you can find different groups, for example, groups of interest. and just make yourself a friend of these groups and introduce yourself and invite people. But this is not enough. In my understanding, I think the most important one is to have a clear mission, to write the goals, to make a plan, and to plan it very carefully. So in our case, it was a really ambitious idea, but it had to be converted into a human language for everyone to understand. Thank you.
Yes, each project is different, each situation is different. So I think for me, the important thing is to design a process of engagement, not so much of participation, of engagement of different stakeholders. It's this wisdom of crowd thing that we keep talking about, which means as much as citizens and people who live in an area, there should be also experts, there should be also experts from different fields, but there should be above all artists, people who can interpret that space and place and put that space and place into a context in which the local people can imagine themselves in. Because very often we find ourselves to work in conditions in which people are demoralized and they can't think beyond tomorrow or beyond today. So the first task is to instill optimism, to instill the capacity to believe that their town can tell a good story once again, that they themselves are part of a good story. So it's this kind of confidence giving to people, first of all. It's not so much patronizing them and saying who should be part or who should not be part, who should be included or excluded. So I think the first point is change the perspective and think that everybody who is there falling in love is a good expression, is a good way. Fall in love with your town, with your neighborhood, and gather then perceptions, information through social media, through the mass media, whatever it is that is there. But also then cross-reference that with a different kind of set of skills. So get the experts in, but challenge the wisdom of the experts with the wisdom of the citizens. Put them together in a room and then brainstorm with them. So you need people to moderate this kind of process. So we need interpreters, we need mediators. And sometimes I find that artists and creatives are good mediators in these conditions.
Yes, thank you. Can I just chime in that if the tools you choose are prioritizations, for instance, if you're if you're relying heavily on social media, then the aging people might not be as actively engaged as other groups. So there is an ideal and then there is the reality. But please go on, Araceli.
Well, when I think, yes, of course, there are when you, so we try not to exclude anybody. However, we cannot include anybody because then we will go nowhere, I think. And yes, some persons cannot deal with the newer media or other kinds of media, and perhaps we should try to find them. Or not. So you can make a decision about what will you do or what not, and who do you include, who do you exclude. But what I found this morning actually is that participation it's an inclusive word and it's a very nice word and I will embrace it. But how complex it is as well to try to include many things and many persons, and this multi-perspectivity that might help, I think, that we respect different perspectives on cultural heritage. And what also I think it's difficult is actually this access to this right of access to cultural heritage, and having this in combination with destruction of cultural heritage. And having values and respecting values. And I will not say that I respect others' values of persons who will destruct cultural heritage, but that are also values. So your first question, how do you prioritize? And how is it it came to me when you discussed the human rights issue. When we think human rights, everybody has a human right. that also means that the opponents also have a kind of right. How do we deal with that? So I do not want to make it more complex than it is, but at least that is really something in my mind. How are we going to deal with that? And this multi-perspectivity, that might help in some way, or at least that we can, and that does not know that we should agree with other person's values, but at least it might help to think of it. And it might help to convince others to, well, you understand what's going on in my head, so it's quite complex there, and it's a bit of a mess. So
Oh, yes. It sounds like a nightmare for urban planners who want to streamline processes, and somebody's talking about complexity and accepting uncertainty and participating everyone, so that usually makes them grey in the face. But all right, would you like to continue?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. With your past and present, you're saying that social media for the older demographic wouldn't work. It actually does with your past and present. Our group's mainly made up of the older demographic. It's kind of strange, but it does actually work. When we were given the chance to tour the Guildhall, we went round certain shops and asked if we could advertise, and unfortunately, the shops that we asked that would get the whole of or reach more of York as a community based wouldn't let us advertise. So what we had to do was we had to go print our own little leaflets and be really quite cheeky and go into shops and say, can you please put these up in the windows? To try and include everybody that has a right to go see the place before it was changed, let's say. When it came to doing the very last tour, we actually approached an online newspaper called York Mix and asked them to advertise for us as well, which they did, and we got an awful lot of people. We got 400 people over the whole entire weekend to take round, which was absolutely fantastic.
Is there a difference in which the sort of elderly segment and younger people sort of engage?
The older demographic like to try to think new things. They aren't bothered if they do something wrong. They don't care. Basically, they can just say, "Well, we've tried it," which is fantastic. Yeah. The younger demographic's a bit more awkward because they think, well, I don't know what they think. I'm too old to think like a young person anymore. Whether it's they're not really quite interested because it's not. How would I explain it? Whether they're not quite interested because, well, it doesn't matter to them at the moment. Because I think we can all take things for granted at times. But yeah.
Yeah, it seems to be opposite to our situation. It's very interesting. Right.
Well, we're fortunate. We can get everybody of every age included because we have local ties with newspapers, we have online ties, we have radio ties. So we online demographics are usually younger people, but we can use newspapers and we can use radio to get through to everybody that we actually need to get to. I do tend to find out the demographic between 30 and sort of 50 is the people that are more interested in what's going on in York, especially where we live. I mean, I don't know about everywhere else, but it certainly does seem to be where we live is that demographic important.
What about the ethnic minorities?
We get everybody installed. Well, we had major flooding in York a few years ago, and we had a lot of flooding, and a lot of ethnic minorities were immediately out protecting the Guildhall, protecting the parts of the city. So I mean, everybody gets involved.
Right. Okay.
So just quickly, I think it's really worth recognising that there is a tension in heritage rhetoric between the ideas of everyone, humanity, the public, and participation. And I've seen it time and time again that specific people who care are kind of pushed aside in the name of everybody else, this abstract other that's somehow not present. And I think that's a way of hiding professional power, that professionals then get to mediate who, on behalf of everybody else in some way. I think that's the fundamental challenge that we need to move beyond. I think one of the things that I would say is don't push the usual suspects away, embrace the usual suspects, but encourage them to open that up to wider groups of people. The way I tend to work is to constantly expand my network, so to try and constantly meet new people that then can be brought into also sharing something in the public domain. And I think it's just crucial to think differentially, which is the point that the first speaker made about what's important to people, because different things are important to different people. But what we need is to design complex participatory approaches that allow different people to participate in different ways. For some things, there will be people who want to be participants and play an active role, and there will be publics for all sorts of other heritages. So we need to think more differentially in a more sophisticated way about that.
It's a bit difficult to add much more to that, but in Ireland generally, local communities in small towns and villages are very well organised. And if you're coming into a village like that to work, then we would start by meeting the people who are already very well organised and largely would have the facilities and ways of advertising fully a meeting, for example, in the village. So we rely on local resource to do it.
Yes, in villages you might have this sort of Swiss type of democracy, but maybe in urban areas with more than 10,000 inhabitants it gets more tricky. But thank you very much. Does the floor want to add anything or have questions? Are there? Yes.
Very short, maybe a microphone.
Yeah, that's why it is like that.
To begin with, this morning you spoke about top down and bottom up, and I think sometimes you can't choose between both. We wouldn't have the World Heritage Place in Bergen, the wharf, today if we had the bottom up. People were demonstrating to tear down this rotten building. In this whole area would have been vanished. That's one approach, because the specialists, the heritage people, wanted it kept, and today it's a World Heritage Place, and awarded by Europa Nostra too, and so on. But we have now Vienna Center is threatened by the planned and real estate developers who want high-rise building in the World Heritage Site in the center, and there you need the bottom up.
Well, when they built the Ringstrasse, I mean, there must have been a shock for everybody. So there's always a point where innovation really pushes the boundaries, really, and we have to let it go, see what happens. You can burn it down later on.
I think you were first, and then there, and then we need to go on. I think on the front here. There. There.
So, I want to take up Mylène Bédot on a very good point she made in the course of her talk, but which is, I think, getting lost now. There is a situation where democracy is not democracy. And this is the situation where there are minorities. She referred to churches in Kosovo. I can refer to many other examples because I come from close to the Near East. There are many times where in fact it is the minority that has to be listened to, because it is their heritage. And the attempt to talk about participation is an attempt to take over their heritage and, forgive me to say, to destroy it. And I know many such examples. So one has to ask the question, who built this monument, for whom and for what purposes? And that becomes a first and absolutely fundamental question if you are going to relate heritage to human rights. Now, of course, that does not apply to the Ringstrasse in Vienna, nor to the new situations in Vienna where they want to put up huge buildings. There, it seems to me, since you are talking about a democratic society in general and not an ethnically divided society, there the principle of participation by all groups in the community is an important, a very important, how shall I say, retainer, a sort of a defense against special interests. And I don't think and Europa Nostra as a whole does not think, and has put that view in public, that you can just let buildings go up and then ask to knock them down after 50 or 100 years. Quite clearly, they should be opposed from the beginning in the terms of the general interest, in terms of the general interest. That sort of problem exists in most of our countries, and most recently, the one that the Europa Nostra board met in was Malta. But please do not forget that there are many, many instances, and the destruction in Syria points that up, where monuments are not equally respected, and heritage is not equally respected by all members of the same community. But all communities have monuments which they respect, and if we respect them, then we should respect their monuments. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one, yeah, I think. Right. It's getting violent.
Yes. Thank you, thank you. I would like to ask if I haven't followed all the workshops. If there are programs or they have been tools, and if we have results for the participation and the integration of citizens of non-European origin or from other continents or of other religions, and how we can make them to understand the genius loci of a European city or village, to respect it, to estimate it, and to love it at the end.
Thank you. Do we start? Yeah, yes, okay, please, Milen.
If I may, just 2 minutes, just to come back to the bottom-up and top-down, I would see it as a circle, because it's never only one way. I mean, the experts are very important to inform about the cultural heritage, but also people, they have information and a specific knowledge and approach to cultural heritage that they have, and they have to feed in the experts as well. So I see it as a never-ending circle. And on the migrants, I have one example. I didn't work on it specifically, so I just have the general picture, but in a small city called Saint-Denis, next to Paris, they have discovered, doing some construction work from 7,000 years ago, a path, archaeological site underneath the city. And in fact, they developed a whole program for migrants, because it's a town with a lot of migrants, to help on the uncovering, the path. And the whole program was, well, there were also people coming from somewhere else before us. So it gave them a special relationship to that heritage.
Right. Anna-Maja, do we still have time for the 10 more questions I prepared for this panel? Or
let's continue discussion.
Or shall we wrap it up? All right. Okay. So thank for the panel, and it's a shame to sort of cut short. There's a very promising discussion, but thanks for the audience as well. It's been a great day.
Wait. Just the chairman, 3 chairmen.
Absolutely. Okay. So, Tapani, please.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Maunu. And thank you, panelists. And just briefly about those 3 workshops, we do have Piet, Costa, and then Peter, yes, somewhere, yes. Just, I would say 1 or 2 minutes each here, if you don't mind. And then we'll close this part of the show, and we try to hurry up. And there's a first time waiting for 8 people. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Should we do? No? Do you hear it?
Yes, you know it.
Okay. Are we interesting, or are we?
Hello.
Are you leaving?
Be patient for 5 minutes, yes.
So for the first group, so it was about new tools for activism, or tools for new activism. We had, let's say, 5 interesting experiences, and the one was let's say, about
Holland, the best heritage towns on Holland, a system of complementing. It's another way, and so we just scroll through the way the way you can check a checklist for complementing cities, and this works very well. We had a very interesting, how do you save DNA heritage in prisons, for the cows in prisons, something very strange. But this was very interesting, that how 10 years ago, without social media, you can get the public informed and you can tell your story, and with a successful way, how this heritage could be saved. And then we had another one, that the boats, you have, that's the last image of what we saw, this tangible and intangible heritage along the coast of Norway that was getting lost, and how by acting locally, and that's very important, acting locally, you got here a new approach, a new dimension, together with, of course, an umbrella organization. But this is, let's say, the basic rule, preservation through use. And this was the recipe that worked so well. And we had in Estonia, so you have always, and we do this with Europa Nostra, awarding excellence and best practices. They do that too, but they say also naming and shaming can also be meaningful, and they have been handing out every year a Lemon Award. And this is not always liked very much. Typically, this is very popular for the press. Very easy to get media attention. And finally, we had here all in Finland a neighborhood, so how a neighborhood works in a complete other way, in a patient way, connecting people, not hurrying to conclusions, but just facilitating and enabling, but just to try to distribute power and responsibility. Very interesting way, successful way, and that's where patience is a basic condition to work. So these were the 5 groups about, let's say, nowadays, how can we things getting done? And let's say some more general conditions is when you have sympathy, or you get sympathy, it's easier to work on heritage. And we got a basic question, putting down a 17th century wooden building, you get a rise, everybody is rising and is getting against, and when a public authority does this. When they put down a concrete building of 30 years old, nobody is rising, although there are people who like this and who would keep it. So how do you do this? This was a basic question. I think we should, and we said sharing heritage, sharing values, but which values? And that was also in the last panel we have heard this. So this, I think, these are some basic ideas out of our group. You agree?
Well, the second group, the second workshop, how to commit people and why. Well, that's a big title. I can't say that the 5 extremely good, all 5 were extremely good presentations, could answer that question, because that's a big philosophical question as well as a practical one. But I will say that all the presentations were good. We started, the 3 first ones were on Finland, Adopt a Monument, Europa Nostra Award, last year, Grand Prix in fact, and it is a superb program, and it was described to us by Tulia Soininen. Then we had, having seen how things are done superbly in Finland, we had 2 very different finished presentations. One from the point of view of creating the equipment for online consultation with people, and the other from examples seen from a town planning point of view, example of Sipo, Micheli, and other cases. And these were very valuable precisely because they came from different points of view, from different people involved in the overall process, which unquestionably means greater participation and therefore more satisfactory planning, but of course does not resolve all the problems. Then we had Dracho, I don't think I got the pronunciation right, but never mind, an outstanding example of a community effort to preserve a historic town. That presentation was by Erik Vind, and it concerned Denmark, a town which has been consistently preserved by its inhabitants for over 200 years, having started out as a maritime town and has become a town in itself, so to speak, a sort of an example of precisely what the fifth presentation went on to talk about, entopia or entopia. You choose where you put the accent, Irish or Greek. And the point about entopia is that it's a Greek concept taken over by an Irishman, and that Irishman, Philip Gagan, made the presentation. And he gave a good example of why entopia is going to end very soon as being a very major Europa Nostra program. It's already a Europa Nostra program, but one would not describe it as a very major one. And that is because Galway was successful in getting the 2020 European Capital of Culture, and all the villages around Galway are part of, or going to be part of, an entopia program, and that has already got a budget, and it's going to work hard. And even if we do not achieve the other things which I think we shall achieve, of European programs for the rest of the entopia program, which is spread across Europe, that at least is almost, well, not almost certain, it is certain now to take off. So we have gone through the gestation phase in entopia, and we are now coming into a phase of fruition. These were the 5 presentations. At the end of it, I think one thing was very clear, that people want to be committed. There is a large number of people out there who wish to be committed, and we have to approach them to find them. And if we approach them and we find them, we will make Europa Nostra, and we will make the cultural heritage movement, and we will make the sustainability and environmental movement strong enough to become really a fundamental future of the Europe that we love. Thank you.
I never imagined, with all the marvellous talks in the other workshops, that human rights and legislation could attract such a good audience and such a very lively one. We could still be discussing all the issues that were brought up, from the possibilities with individuals and communities through to, of course, where Anita Vaivade, my co-chair, started her talk, namely the UNESCO Convention of 2003, then going on to talk about how these things apply to, in particular, the Latvian nationality, and how important the definitions were. At the end, we had comments about just what the structures had to be and what the definitions are. So we couldn't just stick to the, I'm afraid, these marvelous instructions we have had about its being sites which, through human rights and legislation, could inspire the rest of us to do better. But rather, it became a discussion both of local issues and of almost philosophical issues. So we certainly went on to discuss, through the great expertise of Professor Sandro Kamis, on this wonderful monastery in near Kyrenia in northern Cyprus, which had marvelous paintings, had a most beautiful structure, had an ancient structure through the ages, how you could try in a situation not quite as war-torn as those that came up in discussion, namely to do with Turkey and Syria and other countries, but still very difficult to proceed in any speed to get anything done in Cyprus. And again, one appealed in the end to the emergency list, and was successful because of the immense amount of work over many years, professional work done, to make it on the UN heritage list. And now some work is being done. But they went off with mosaics in a truck one day. And this brings me to something that happened in Europa Nostra UK. We had Lord Renfrew to give our Duncan Sands lecture, and he talked about all the, so to speak, reputable auction houses who didn't check provenance, who were selling these items we've referred to already. This is one place where Europa Nostra is going to continue to work. It was mentioned to us yesterday that just the selling of goods which have been chipped off famous sites which are in war-torn areas or difficult areas to supervise. So this is going to be one thing which we should forward and work with. Other things became more difficult. We got into interesting structural discussions because we had with us Jacek Purfler, who of course is expert on the World Heritage Site, as we've discussed in other things, and he reminded us of his need to get things into a structural situation to save Central Europe, even from bad decisions which had happened in Lithuania and the conflicts arising. And we were finally reminded that the United Nations is there for communities to approach with bad examples, and that countries went to the particular committees every so many years, and they could be called to account by the United Nations Committee on Bad Country. I think that might work with some countries which don't have the sophisticated planning laws, human rights laws that some others. Of course, countries which do will always have a ready answer. But other countries could be challenged to provide the help which is very much needed. I'll just conclude by one member of council who came to me, who couldn't come to the session, who said to remind people that duties and responsibilities even come before human rights. Well, that was a matter for discussion we didn't have time for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Piet. Thank you, Costa. Thank you, Peter, a lot, and thank you, audience.